This is what happens when you time travel. Okay, Deconverted Man here. This won't take long because I've covered every single one of these arguments before. But JMD Apologetics, I guess, doesn't have anything new to offer. Really not surprised. Posted a video, the cumulative case for Christianity by this John Dunfree. Who's John Dunfree? I don't know, some apologetic, whatever. So he offers the Kalam, fine-tuning, and the minimal facts argument for Christ. And this is it. That's it. That's the cumulative case for Christ. Of course, this is the shotgun tactic. First of all, that's the formal fallacy being committed. You just shoot out several arguments at once and hope that your opponent can't deal with all of them. Usually this would take place in a actual debate, but this is a analysis of a video, so it can, you can spend time dealing with every single argument, which I've done in other videos, but the theists that are on his channel, I guess, don't want to look for those or look up the other objections to these arguments that already exist and they're out there. But it just brings to mind for me is I used to think that the Kalam was great until I learned logic. Now I don't, because I understand logic and a little bit more about science than I did when I first learned it. So it's really nothing new, for the Kalam, and same old. Let's see, premise one is making sure that I read it off correctly. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Okay, the word everything is a universal clause statement. Universals need to be proven. You can't do that in this case because you literally would have to know everything about everything. You don't know that, so you cannot say everything. You could only say at best what we have observed thus far, ... fill in the rest. But that's not what it says, so that makes this not true, or at least partially not true, so it's a half-truth. So there's one logical fallacy already. Begins to exist is very vague. What does it mean to begin to exist? I've covered this before. I've talked about the table analogy. When can you say a table had begun to exist? Certainly you can say that the person that made it is the efficient cause or something like that if you want to use those sort of terminology, but when is a table a table? I mean, you could just chop a tree down and say it's a table because the stump can be used as a table. Heck, you don't even necessarily have to chop down the tree. You could climb up it and sit on top of it and say, hey, it's a table. What's a table? You get into problems of law of identity there. So what was the cause of the table? Was just me declaring that it was a table, or was it, when I made the legs of the table, does it even need legs to be a table? So what does this mean? It's completely vague and undefined, and because of that, those bring problems to it. Those make it incoherent. But so when can we say something has begun to exist? Because we don't know what that means. It's vague language. Nothing. And the other problem is this is all supposedly referring to the origin of the universe, which might be very different from the things that we observe inside the known universe that we have. The beginning of the universe was, super, super hot, and is nothing like the universe we observe. So this is a problem of conflation of this versus that. The past is not the present. The past that you're talking about is very different. So we already know that this is talking about the universe, so we already know that there's going to be problems, scientifically speaking, with this, and this is going to bring all sorts of equivocation, which is noticeable because of the vagueness of the language. It has a cause. Well, cause and effect are things that we observe on a very basic level, perhaps, but can the same be said of cosmological events? That the cause of elements is stars exploding, kind of, but also kind of not. Like, I mean, that's what caused that. I mean, what, again, it's just a really vague language, but even if you grant it, you have to say that that's a half truth as well, because it ignores quantum physics, where we might have some things coming into existence uncaused, for all we know, and whether or not that's what's going on is hard to say. So they go on with the first premise, asking about, asking more questions about that premise, as if the premise had been accepted by anybody that's not a theist. So no, I don't accept this first premise. There's no reason to. Its language is it's bad, it's ill-defined, has at least a half-truth, if not equivocation as well, and it's incoherent. So for all those reasons, I object to it. The second premise is the universe began to exist, has the same problems as the first one. Was begin to exist mean? This is incoherent. We require an entire argumentation just to explain what you mean by begin to exist, and how do we jump from other things having causes or coming into existence, or whatever you mean by that, to the universe also following the same rules. It doesn't have to necessarily follow the same rules, for all we know. Cause and effect might be a local phenomenon. Once the universe gets to a certain point, then that begins to work. Physics simply breaks down at a certain point within the singularity that made that is the expansion of what became our universe. But when you're at this point, it's still a universe. It's just a very different type of universe. And so, if you want to go back to where it's really super small, that's great. But then you can't ever go past or before that point, because there is no before. There's no time. There's no space. There really isn't room for anything or any time to do anything. So it doesn't really exist. It's just not even a thing. So what happens before that point? There is no before that point. So how do you talk about that? But that's only our current mathematical models, and we don't really know, because, well, we don't even know how the physics will work when everything is so hot and everything is so dense like that. And so this makes huge assumptionary leaps about how the universe in its early stages would function. And so on a scientific basis, completely fails. Now they go into, well, we know that the universe has a beginning with the Big Bang expansion, but you're already missing the point. You don't know that any of that is being caused or how any of that is working, because you're not dealing in science. You're dealing in at best a philosophical argument that is already loaded with assumptions and logical fallacies, vagueness and equivocation here, and simply stating something that we don't know is true. We don't really know if the universe began to exist, or even if that's coherent. Like, it's a starting point. Like, okay, you have this little tiny dot. We can't say anything before that dot, because we don't know. It's an unresolved question, might be unresolvable, and then it gets bigger. After that, then yeah, once you get into that stuff, then you can talk about it. But when did being honest ever stop apologists? He mentions the second law of thermodynamics in this presentation. I would love for him to tell me what the first law is, or how many there are of thermodynamics. No, this is what happens when you go through time, Andrew. So the expansion of the universe, yes. Radiation of globe, right. And he goes into a long, detailed talk to some degree of the Big Bang cosmology, which I don't think that John knows anything about other than, you know, what he's learned in this sort of argumentation. I don't know. Maybe he's talked to cosmologists. I know that it's certainly beyond my field to talk decently about Big Bang cosmology. So why would I think that an apologist somehow has knowledge unless they've proven their expertise in that field? So why are we listening to somebody? I mean, I'm not saying that just because he's not an expert doesn't mean he's right or wrong, but am saying that his lack of expertise on this just gives one pause. Like, well, why are we even bothering listening to you talk about Big Bang cosmology? I mean, what more? What could you possibly know that the rest of us couldn't know from looking up some things online or whatnot, or reading some books? So, you know. But anyway, so then he brings up some objections or possible objections, which he just, I mean, he has really lame explanations for the objections, but okay, I don't care about that. Then he goes on to the fine-tuning argument. The universe is not fine-tuned in the sense the apologist needs it to be fine-tuned. And so the idea is that it's fine-tuned for life. What does that mean? It means that if anything was slightly off, then life would be impossible. But what that really is life as we know it here on Earth would not be possible if these constants were different. If things were different, then we'd have a different universe. Now, other life could develop in that other universe, for all we know. And in fact, other places in the universe, life might very well be developed or had developed. We have no idea. So unless the apologist wants to show us some simulations of different universes coming into being with different physics and showing us that they can never be produce life, then this is simply an assertion about we know that it worked this time, and we're just going to say that it can't work ever for anything else. But it's funny because the theists will say, on one hand, they'll say, "Oh, it's really fine-tuned for life," but you go, "Well, look at all this empty space in the universe. I can't survive in outer space. You can't survive it. You know, very few, maybe nothing. You know, maybe that little tiny bear thingy can survive in space, but maybe not for that long." So it's not really that well tuned for life. And then they'll say, on the other hand, well, yeah, see, life can only happen in this little tiny planet, in this little tiny solar system, and probably that's the only place we know that it happened at all. So that makes it miraculous. So it's both fine-tuned and not fine-tuned at the same time. And of course, it just takes the scientific terminology fine-tuned and completely scraps what it actually means to be substituted for what they want it to mean, which is a complete reversal of the anthropic principle. Of course, we are in a universe that would be permitting to, we're on a planet in the universe that allows for life. It would be very odd to be in a different type of universe. In fact, that would be a better argument for some sort of supernatural causation, that if we found that everything on the planet and everything in the universe was against our existence, yet here we were, that would give us great reason to pause. But why would God even be playing this game of hide and seek anyways, that you have to say, oh, look how fine-tuned the universe is. That must mean God. I wonder which God. Let me check out the 14,000 plus gods that have ever existed, plus the new ones that are coming into being by random schmo on the street. Why play this game? Just be obvious. Just be there. Just be something we can see and interact with. But oh well, that's a different problem. But the fine-tuning argument isn't even what the fine-tuning is. So as far as so scientifically it's completely flawed. As far as logically speaking, you know, all they do is show meaningless statistics in this particular one. He has a bunch of meaningless statistics that, it's like, well, if things were altered, then things would be different, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. But you haven't shown us what that other universe would look like. Okay, great. Show us a simulation first of this universe. That would be impressive because you would need a supercomputer to simulate how the universe, unrolls itself with the physics that we currently understand. Then run that again, but just slightly change it and see what would happen. Would life still have developed, or would it be impossible? Is this statement actually true, or do you just think that it's true? Well, it's a bald assertion. There's no actual argument to back up. There's no actual data to back up what he's saying. It's just an assertion. So the fine-tuning argument doesn't work. And even if it did, even if you could say, well, the universe is so life permitting, that's amazing. I mean, life is just, well, then it would be everywhere. It wouldn't be on just one planet. It could be in space too. Why wouldn't it be in space? But how does any of that matter? Because again, it's the anthropic principle. Of course, life is going to appear in a universe that allows for life. This assumes that the universe is made in order for life to exist. So you're already pre-assuming the conclusion. And so that's some of the problems with it. Premise one: the fine-tuning universe for intelligent life is either due to physical necessity, chance, or design. Well, this is a false triple dichotomy. The universe doesn't know or care that life is here. This is an accidental result of what happened. And I guess that would be physical necessity to some degree, but it would also be chance, and it'll also just be this is what happened. And to suggest that it has to be this way implies a lot, and to suggest that it's either that or this or that. No, we don't know. It could be any of those. It could be none of them. It could be all of them at the same time. Who knows? You don't know. But the first premise here, at least in his presentation, is and by the way, I didn't link the video I'm talking about here. Yeah, I'll get to the comment here. That this is like a triple false dichotomy. It's like it's not a false dichotomy. It's a false trichotomy or something. Excluded middle as well. So it's unsupported bald assertion. Let's see. Premise two is not due to physical necessity or chance. How do you know that? It's just asserted. Premise two is just simply asserted with no argument. So you haven't supported your burden. Also, you have some formal error here. This is actually structured incorrectly. This should be a modus teleos, the way that he's formatting it. It's not X. It's either X, Y, or Z. It's not X or Z. Therefore, it's how did I say X, Y, or Z? It's not X. It's okay. I'm screwing myself up. It's not A, B. It could be A, B, or C. It's not B or C. Therefore, it's A. Okay. I'd have to really double check that he's got the format here right, because I'm just doing this as I go. So he could be getting it right. Oh, he has a third premise. Never mind. His formatting is completely incoherent at this point. You only have two premises and a conclusion in an argument. You don't have more. It's just bad formatting when you have more. In fact, that wouldn't be a premise three. Therefore, it's due to design. That wouldn't be your premise. That would be a conclusion. So, I mean, it's just bad formatting. But you haven't supported premise two anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And again, he goes into objections that he doesn't really explain away that well. Let's see. Andrew said the fine-tuning argument is essentially telling us that God is so incompetent that someone else created God's universe for him, and God's just fine-tuned the universe simply of creating it. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's not a good argument for. It's not a good argument. I mean, that's one problem. But if you're telling me that God can do anything, but it decided for reasons that it was going to make the universe in such a structured way that it would have to obey these rules, and we wouldn't see any evidence of God, and that eventually life would appear uh, in such a way that it doesn't appear to need God either. And I mean, it's just, why does God have to follow any rules at all? Because it could be anything. And if God wants us to know that it exists, but doesn't want us to know that it has to kind of play hide and seek, I guess. So for whatever reason, why not just then create a universe that doesn't seem like it could? There's no air, yet we breathe somehow, and people are like, well, how does this work? And nobody can figure it out. And even then, do you say God? Well, that would be appeal to ignorance. So God should just be observable like everything else in the universe. That would be good. But oh well. Yeah, add your comments to the video and be ready for the nitwits on that video that responded to me already, saying that well, you have nothing but assertions. So I've dealt with these arguments already in my and other videos I've done me versus William Lane Craig, where he dealt with his Kalam stuff. I've done fine tuning before. I don't know that I've covered the minimal facts for Christ, but there are no facts to even talk about. This assumes that the Gospels are reliable at all, which you have to make an argument for, which isn't made any argument in this case. So why do I care about the Gospels? They're myth. That's it. They're made up. Somebody made them up and wrote it down. The end. So nothing in there is fact, if that's my view. And until you show that I should consider these things as something more than myth, that's going to continue to be my view. But what this does is pre-assumes that we can believe anything in the Gospels, and then says, well, the four Gospels talk about these things happening, and they're written by different people, although one is written after the other, and then the other one's after that, and then the other one's after that. So it's not like the other people wouldn't have known anything about these other writings. Again, but even if it was written by different people, now here's something that would be interesting. If every single human that had some religion, no matter where they are, all came to the same conclusion about God, that would be something. If God had bothered to visit everywhere, that would have been interesting. I mean, at least the Mormons enhanced the story a little bit by Jesus coming to check out America. I mean, it's incoherent, but why not? He can teleport anywhere he wants. Although they say he can only do that after he has died and then come back. I don't know why he couldn't do it before. He's half God or all God. He's all God, all human. I don't know. So why not? Why not just reveal? Why not just tell the entire world at the same time what you are and how you work? If that means sending a bunch of Jesus clones, great. Oh, but then it's not a sacrifice. So who says? You have all the Jesuses come together and be sacrificed, or you have each one be sacrificed. Why would it matter? Why does God need a sacrifice? What does God need with a starship anyway? But anyways, they take the four Gospels and they pretend that those are anything that we should care about, and say, oh look, they all say that Jesus died by crucifixion. They all say that the disciples believe that Jesus rose and appeared as being true. They all agree on that. Then you have Paul's conversion, which is which has nothing really to do with anything that actually happened. Actually, it's only 3 gospels if we ignore Paul, which we should, because Paul's basically the first apologist. He's some guy that claims to have been persecuting Christians for a while. I don't know that he did. I don't know if that there's any evidence that he actually did that. And then he has this like psychotic breakdown and is like, "Oh yeah, I saw Jesus. Yeah, I totally did." Yeah, right. No, you didn't. You just like you want to tell these churches what to do, and so he did. He told these churches, "You're doing it wrong. I saw Jesus." No, really, you can do that. Really, why you? Why not anyone else? Because Paul wanted to be special, maybe. Um, but the early church found things that were useful, and that's why Paul became canon eventually. And by the way, which things don't become canon and why not? We're not going to talk about that. That would be getting into it. Anyway, so Paul's conversion has nothing to do with anything. Um, Minimal fact for the conversion of the skeptic James. James was a skeptic? I thought the only skeptic was Thomas. So I'm not sure, but again, this is part of the story. So why do I think any of this actually happened? And then the empty tomb, which is also in the stories that you haven't shown actually happened. Nobody knows where this tomb is, by the way, and it's never been found. Actually, sorry, negate that. It's been found several times, all of which have been fraudulent. And now, because it's a tourist destination, Jerusalem just says where it was and has you can walk this path that Jesus walked. They have no idea where Jesus walked. But hey, it's good for tourism, so whatever. Good luck finding anything of actual historical merit now, given how much of a tourist destination and money is involved in this. So it's extremely hard to actually find any of it. Well, there is no archaeological evidence for any of this, of course. But it would be very hard to find it because you'd have to dig under places that are tourist destinations now, if you could find anything at all, which you won't, because there's nothing to find. So none of these are minimal facts, and all of them rely on you accepting the Gospels as anything other than fiction. So the case for the resurrection is completely and in whole presuppositionalism 101. You have to assume that the Bible Gospels are true. You have to assume that they're true in some degree historically, that nobody just made up stuff, nobody just pretended that this stuff happened, nobody got it wrong. You have to assume a lot, and at that point you're already a Christian anyway, so why would any of it matter? If you're already pretending that the Gospels actually are history, then you already believe this stuff, and then you don't need the argument. The argument cannot be used to convince a skeptic because it contains no actual facts. It contains this is what the story says, is how I would put it, not, well, this is a fact. Well, great. Here's a Spider-Man comic. Minimal fact number 1, he was bitten by a radioactive spider. Minimal fact number 2, James Jamerson called him out in New York, and now everybody knows he's Peter Parker. And how else can you possibly explain him being Spider-Man unless So if you assume that the story is true, then this works for you. But there's no reason to assume the story is true. So the minimal facts for the resurrection aren't any facts at all and don't prove anything. But even if you were for some reason to grant that all of the Gospels at least get some stuff right, that Jesus actually existed, actually died, and that the disciples actually began to believe that he wasn't really dead, how do you then explain it? And that's what this whole thing builds up to. So it's not even an argument. There's no syllogism, by the way. So there's another formal fallacy. So he says, well, how do you possibly explain it? And then he comes up with some explanations. the swoon theory, the conspiracy theory, the hallucination theory, the combination theory. I guess that's combining them, and then he talks his way out of all of those. Well, how about this? It's a story. It didn't happen. Somebody thought that it happened, or somebody heard that it had happened, or someone wanted to believe that it had happened. Someone wrote it down. That's it. That's what we know for sure. Now, maybe that person didn't believe any of it. Maybe they believed it all. Maybe they were given money to do so and they didn't care what they were writing. Who knows? But that's it. Somebody wrote a story, and it's just a story. And because it contains things that are not mundane, they are beyond extraordinary events. Jesus supposedly dies and comes back from the dead. Well, he might have existed, and people might have followed him, and he might have died. And what might have happened is they might have thought, no, he's really actually alive. And they might have talked themselves into believing that he's alive. Or all it really takes is one person to be a dishonest actor and say that they saw Jesus. And then because they're so upset, because they're so invested in this cult leader, because that's what he would be when he existed, would have been a cult leader. A cult's basically where the leader's still alive, religion's where the leader's dead. But that's what it would have been. It would have been like a really fanatic cult leader. In fact, there's this guy that claims to be Jesus in, I want to say, Germany. And he's got this huge following. And I think it was Vice did like an interview with him. Of course, he does. I mean, he looks like what all the modern imagery of Jesus, but of course, Jesus would be dark and Jewish, so he wouldn't be Caucasian, and he wouldn't, look like what we think Jesus looks like. I remember History Channel doing this whole thing of what Jesus would really look like, and just looks like this ugly guy. And it's like, yeah, he just look like a dude. He wouldn't look anything. In fact, the Bible says he doesn't look special. So, but at any rate, so if he dies, if that Jesus guy dies, which he will eventually, then what's going to happen to all his followers? They could all just say that no, he's not really dead. That maybe his kid is now Jesus, because he's Jesus reincarnate, of course. I mean, they could make up any sort of story to keep it going. And if their way of life is threatened by him dying, they'd be super invested in doing that. Like, no, he's not dead. He's actually still alive. Or, he transferred to this other person, or any other thing. And you have thousands upon thousands of people that all worship this guy and are part of this community. So here you have a handful of people that had invested heavily into one guy who's now dead. All you need is one person to say, no, he's not dead, and that starts the ball rolling. But that's assuming that any of this actually happened, and I have no reason to assume any of it happened. So he mentions a book by some people I've never heard of and don't care about that book. No reason for me to think that that book has anything else. And that's basically the rest of his presentation, is talking about the resurrection of Jesus, which didn't happen and couldn't happen. So you got nothing there. So all of these arguments are logically flawed, scientifically flawed, historically flawed, factually flawed, but the theists that don't know logic support them. Well, of course, when you don't know logic, it's easy to think that the Kalam sounds good. When you don't know logic, it's easy to think that the fine-tuning works. When you don't know science, it's also easy to think that those things are good. But when you actually learn logic and science, then you realize those arguments suck. What about the resurrection one? Well, if you learn history, then you learn that that one's not very good, because the problem is we don't have any examples of a thing called miracle today So we don't know that it can actually happen. So if we don't know it can happen today, why would we think it can happen in the past? And so you would have to have this thing called faith, which actually is what the Bible promotes, anyways. So instead of pretending that there's evidence for any of this, why not just say it's faith? Because that's what it is. But apologists get good money for pretending that there's evidence for any of this when there is no evidence at all. Because if you had evidence, you wouldn't need faith. You don't have a valid and sound argument. You don't have any empirical evidence. You don't have a repeatable test. And so, unless and until you do, we're going to have to keep being skeptical of your conclusions. But maybe this is why JMD has avoided debating me for so many years going on now. He kind of know, maybe he kind of knows he would lose. I don't know. I'm just putting that out there just to rub some salt into his wounds. Nothing new under the sun. At least the Bible got that right, but not much else. So, special Sunday number 4, cumulative case for Christianity is crap. Thanks for listening. Comment, share, do all that stuff if you want. I've done all these arguments anyway, so I mean, this is kind of just a brief recap. But thanks for watching. That's it. And this is what happens when you travel through time. That only makes sense if you watched the last video. So, yeah. Also, I have a blog, so go check out my blog if you want. So, yeah. Link to blog is going to be in the description now, because, I mean, we'll be in the description, and, you know, I'll put it other places, I guess, you know, maybe. Or maybe I'll be, like, gone and just, like, kind of, like, hint at it. The Christian God is so weird, because it's like, oh, I want this relationship with humanity. Then just make humans so that they're with you. Why put them in a mortal coil when you're already immortal? Like, what is the point of any of that? Oh well. Anyways, unless and until we have a valid and sound argument, which we definitely don't have here, we should be skeptical of the conclusions. And I only got 6 views for the Yahweh made sinner. Oh well. Anyways, I'll just put my blog in general in the thing and leave it at that. Let people read whatever they want to read. Good night. Or good day. Or good bad day. I don't know. Whatever it is. Press the button. Pressing the button. End the stream. Yes, I do.